Syracuse still without a number one wide receiver. Derek McDonald played really well in his first game as a starter, and there have been some shakeups in the depth chart, most importantly, on the defensive line. We'll talk about it all on Locked On Syracuse. It's right now.
Are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Tuesday morning, Matt Bonaparte, Owen Valentine, we're with you. We're with you right now. We're with you always. Okay. Thanks for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. If you want to tweet at us, if you want to email us, here are those things. Email losyracuse44@gmail.com. Give us your thoughts, opinions, questions about Syracuse football right now, basketball in the future, anything you want to say, put it there, or tweet at us or follow us, please do, at Locked On Syracuse, at LO_Syracuse on Twitter. Owen, today we've got some talking points about Syracuse football. Paramount is the wide receiver room. We came into this year with a depth chart that, first of all, didn't even include Anthony Quealy, who was a huge part of what they were trying to do last year. And Courtney Jackson wasn't the number one. He was at the end of last year. Damian Alford's the number one. There were a lot of questions about that wide receiver room coming into this season. 2 games in, I think everybody's satisfied. Yet the question still remains, are they ever going to define a one? Somebody asked Dino Babers about that in his press conference leading up to the Purdue game this week. He basically said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. My question is, do you think they will need to do that, define a number one wide receiver, if they will make a bowl game this season?
I don't think they need to, but I think it will happen naturally. I think this is something that you don't need to force. Like, you don't need to force making Courtney Jackson your number one or Devon Cooper your number one. I think you just need to continue doing what you're doing, spreading the ball out, finding open receivers, mixing things up, going through full progressions, and you're going to have a guy naturally sort of emerge as a number one, I would assume. I think if you try to force someone into that role, it might not help you as much as if someone sort of naturally rises to that occasion. I think it could happen from, I'm going to say probably my thoughts would be Courtney Jackson or Devon Cooper right now, but I think there might be another case to be made at some point. I think Oronde Gadsden, we talked about this a little bit last episode. I don't really see him as becoming that number one just because of sort of where his role is right now and sort of becoming that he's going to be open at maybe a later look in a progression, or he's not necessarily going to be running as many deep routes. And I think that's okay. I think Gadsden's going to get his fill, and I would be pretty sure Gadsden stays the number two just because of the way that role is. There's maybe a way that he can become the number one if those routes become a little bit deeper and the usage ups a little bit even more. But I think he is sort of, in my mind, I see him as being that number two guy for the remainder of this season, at least, just because of sort of how that role seems to have been in the past with Robert and I, and how it seems like it has looked so far through 2 games for Syracuse. I don't know who it is right now, and I think you're not dead in the water if it becomes no one when all is said and done, and you continue to go by committee, and you continue to just do what you can. I always think back to the Heat game, or the Heat team, when they had the big 3, and it's, who takes the shot, and it's Ray, and then Ray says the open man. I'm taking Ray Allen's perspective here and just find the open man, pass them the ball, whether you hit 11 receivers through 2 games or 10 receivers like you did against UConn, or you have 4 guys that are catching more passes. As long as you're passing to open men and gaining positive yards, I do not care what happens with this wide receiver group.
So I think I agree that it doesn't need to happen, but the only way that it does happen is through the only guy you didn't name, which was Damian Alford. If Alford just turns into an animal and he's unguardable because he's 6'6" and he's got great footwork at some point, then there will be a wide receiver one. I think there is no other way that it happens because Alford probably, for my money, has the most talent in that room right now. I would take him to be that guy if there was that guy. Keep in mind that since Gino Babers took over, there has always been a defined wide receiver one. Amba
Yeah.
Edetawo in 16, Steve Ishmael in 17. In 18, it was Jamal Custis, Tristan Jackson in 19. 2020 was Taj Zir. 2021, kind of Courtney
Technically, Courtney
when
Jackson.
Taj left, but it was Courtney after that. And then now there is none. Damian Alford has the chance to make it his team if he wants to go out there and just start catching a touchdown or two every single week, which could happen. Like, we can't rule that out. He's been
Not at all.
fantastic through 2 weeks, but I don't think it needs to happen, especially if their offense runs pretty smoothly through not having that be the case, which has absolutely been the way it's looked through 2 games. So, like Dino basically said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I don't want to see Syracuse do something that could potentially hurt them, because obviously through 2 games right now, we're a little bit short-sighted. But success is nice, and this isn't something Syracuse has had in 4 years. Since 2018, they haven't been 2-0 to start a year. So I am in agreement with Babers on leave it how it is if it's leading to success right now.
Right. I am very excited to just sit back and let whatever happens with this wide receiver group happen. I see a world where there is a clear cut to find number one, and whoever that might be, good to them, good on them for emerging and really showing out. I would assume you're going to show out in the next week or two against Purdue, against Virginia, in very, very big games, as we'll detail later in this week. If you can show out in those 2 games, then maybe you've established yourself as a number one. But I really do not want to see anything forced with this group. I enjoy sort of watching what happens when you've got so many options and so many different threats. And when you've got that clear-cut number one, then that's a defensive focus on top of Sean Tucker, on top of Garrett Schrader. So maybe, defining a number one actually opens things up for the rest of the wide receiver group too. So who even knows what happens once this number one is sort of figured out, if that happens. I see this group right now with a lot of positives, and I will come out and admit that walking into this season, I did not expect to speak of this wide receiver group with a ton of positives going into week 3. I like what I've seen from a lot of them. I started to see some flashes of all right, this is actually a wide receiver play. They made a move, they got open, they got up, they caught a ball. And not just the quick pass and here's a 9-yard gain. Not that doesn't win you games, because it does, but when it comes to finding who this best wide receiver is, who can be the best wide receiver, that's sort of what I'm starting to look into. I think you bring up a good point with the height of Damian Alford. I don't think the usage is there just yet to
Not
become
right
the number
now,
one,
but he's got
definitely
the talent to do it if
Yeah.
anybody.
I think it definitely has the possibility and the capabilities. That usage rate is definitely going to have to bump up in terms of targets. And he's caught 1 pass through 2 games, albeit a 47-yard touchdown. But I would like to see a little bit more in terms of, what can he do when he doesn't just break out completely. Not that, I'm going to complain if he does consistently just break out. So that's something that I'm going to look for in terms of him. But I really do think that number one in terms of this group can come from 3, maybe 4 different spots. And I am okay with watching, sitting back, and letting that happen whenever and if it ever happens.
So that does it for our thoughts on the wide receiver room. After this ad, we'll talk about Derek McDonald's first game as a starter in that linebacking core. But first, let's talk about upside, okay? From cringing at the pump to getting an eye-popping check at your favorite restaurant, inflation is hitting us all where it hurts, and it really hurts. That's why you should start using Upside. Upside is an incredible app for anyone who buys gas, groceries, or dines out. With every purchase, you'll be earning cash back thanks to Upside. To get started, download the free Upside app, use promo code LOCKED, and get $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more. Next, claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside. Check in at the business, pay as usual with a credit or debit card, and get paid. In comparison to credit card rewards or loyalty programs, you can earn 3 times more cash back with Upside. Upside users are earning more than $1 million every week. That's probably why they have a 4.8 star rating on the App Store. Download the free Upside app and use promo code LOCKED to get $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more. That's $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more using promo code LOCKED. Alrighty, back here on Locked On Syracuse, Matt Bonaparte, Owen Valentine with you on this wonderful Tuesday. All right, let's talk Derek McDonald. This guy has had quite the journey at Syracuse. Showed up wearing number 81 in a tight end role. He didn't see it. He didn't like it. 6'4". He's like, I want to move on to bigger and potentially better things. The redshirt freshman, now wearing number 15, is playing linebacker. And when Stephon Thompson goes down in week 1 with a probable ACL tear, you got to step up. And Derek McDonald did just that. Derek McDonald, in his first game as a Syracuse starting linebacker, is tied for 4th on the team in terms of PFF grade with Michael Jones. So through PFF size, Pro Football Focus, he played just as well as Michael Jones. I think everybody in Syracuse land will take that. And their buddy Marlowe was even better. He had an 83.5 point grade. So they were all fantastic.
Yeah. I think when you look at this linebacking group with the question mark of what Derek McDonald is, and when all's said and done in their first game together, they are 3 of the top 5 PFF grades on this football team. I think that says everything that you need to hear about Derek McDonald. That's awesome. He's come out. He's had a half tackle for loss in both of his games so far. When he came in against Louisville, he had 1 or a half, and when in this last game, he has 1 as well. He's doing the job efficiently. He's doing it well, and he's doing a job that, even though you especially had mentioned him a number of times in preseason camp, he wasn't necessarily a guy that we expected to be a major role type player for this team, just because of how excited we were about the linebacking core. But you've brought it up time and time again. Anyone playing in that group, the way Marlowe's been playing, the way Michael Jones is as a leader, and will basically pick up anyone near him and elevate the way they are playing the game of football. Derek McDonald is the perfect fit for this group right now, doing the job. I am excited and very interested to see what happens against not UConn in terms of his performance, but I don't have anything negative to say about him right now. He has all of my confidence right now. I have seen what I want to see from him. I would love to continue seeing what I'm seeing from him, but I think there is a lot more that we can say about Derek McDonald a week from today. But right now, I am incredibly pleased and really, really excited to see if he can rise to this next challenge, right? Week 1, I would say it's week 2, but his week 1 of the challenge, he nailed. He's on to level 2 now, and in level 2, things get a little bit tougher.
A lot tougher,
there's once again more footage on you, more film on you, and you're playing a better offense and a better overall team. Level 2 is definitely level 2. We're moving from medium to hard on our Guitar Hero scale, because I have been playing Guitar Hero for the last 24 hours for whatever reason that is.
McDonald's grade, I think, speaks to how well the defense has played overall in its first 2 games. Hasn't allowed more than 14 points, and they allowed more points to UConn than they did Louisville. So how about that? Syracuse's defense, ranked in terms of opponents' points per game in the country, is 19th with just 10.5 points per game. Of course, just 2 games, so an incredibly small sample size, but they're doing better than about, 118 teams. So, or 102 2. I don't know. I don't do math. Fantastic start to the year for the defense. And if McDonald can slot in and play that well, I think that just speaks to how well the defense is, how close knit they are.
Yeah.
Michael, I wasn't just blowing smoke. Michael, I really think he just brings everybody up who he plays around, and playing around him I mean, for McDonald, that must be huge. He must learn a lot. And it's probably easier to make plays when you have such a, I don't know, sage defender right next to you. So Michael lifting up Derek for sure, and Syracuse's defense benefiting from it.
I was worried a little bit about this linebacking group after week 1. Right now, that worry is out the door, and I really didn't expect it to be as worry-free, even though it is UConn, as I am right now, given McDonald shifting in there. But that has been as fluid a transition as I really have seen in a little bit. I mean, it was so smooth. He comes in, he does every job that you can ask of him. And you go back to the story, right? You start as a tight end, you switch sides, you figure this out, and now you're, out here just killing it basically, in a role that you didn't show up to Syracuse necessarily to play. And he comes in and he is playing to the best of, this team, right? You're looking top 5 in PFF grades in your first start as a linebacker when you weren't expected to maybe have this big role. You were supposed to let me get a year under my belt behind this team or another year under my belt behind this trio of linebackers that is really, really solid and has played together, and you know exactly what you're getting. He came in right now as a question mark, and that question mark has disappeared right now. And I'd swap it out with an exclamation point at this point, because that was the game he played. Interception against Louisville. He comes in, he's doing great things in the second game. I'm amped to see what week 3 happens, or what happens in week 3. He is he's rapidly rising my favorite player list right now. I will say him.
Glad you're joining me.
Yeah, it took me a little longer, but I am with you right now. And Jeremiah Wilson is also just my favorite players to watch list. He's also up there. But this is, I genuinely didn't anticipate speaking as highly about Derek McDonald and what he's done when we, revisited the injuries this time a week ago. So a nod to him for quickly shifting my thoughts, because it just goes to show the performance he had last week, that we are talking about this confidence and this high regard and a top 5 team PFF grade in week 2. Really, really cool to see.
Yeah. All right. Let's switch gears a little bit now. We will talk some depth charts. Syracuse did mix up the depth chart a little bit, not a lot of it, but enough to talk about. The biggest change for my money comes on the defensive line, where Steve Linton, a guy who was left off the depth chart entirely week 1 and week 2, makes it, and doesn't only make it, but is listed at the number 1 spot at defensive end. We saw him playing the edge against UConn a little bit, despite being undersized compared to the guys that he's playing next to at 6'5", 219. He beats out Jatius Gear, who's 6'6", 233. He's a redshirt freshman. Gear was the week 1 starter, but they are listed as or, so it's going to be pretty interchangeable. You will still see both guys on game day, but huge for Steve Linton to break in there, and rightfully so. Game 1 against Louisville, he was fantastic, and I was kind of surprised not to see him on the depth chart against UConn, but hey, he breaks in week 3. I'm happy to see it.
This is another, what a feel-good story episode this is, because this is just another one where you're like, you see a guy that you thought, and we sort of assumed going into the season, was just going to be by default listed on one of those, starting defensive line slots on the 2 deep, if not, clearly being a number 2 on that list. And he is not named on the first 2 depth charts. And he's taken that and risen to the occasion and really shown out. And he got some significant snaps against Louisville in game 1, especially for not being listed on the depth chart. 2 tackles for loss in that game with a sack, a forced fumble, and recovers the fumble himself. Like he comes out against Louisville and does everything that you want from a guy that, maybe you knocked off a pedestal a little bit. Not to say that he was cocky or anything of that manner, but he's a guy that I think a lot of us expected one thing from coming into the year. And I know my eyes were open when I saw that first 2 deep come out, and especially the second one against UConn when, he has an incredible game in week 1 and he's nowhere to be seen. We sort of talked about the fact, maybe it's because he's sort of that in-between size. They're not going to truly list him and just sort of fill him in when the situation and the timing is right. What a nod to him to be back on the 2 deep. And, we're not supposed to read into it, but he is listed above Jatius Gear for whatever that is worth. I know the
Jatius
ore is
played
there,
well too,
but yeah, I think
just for whatever that's worth.
this isn't a knock on Jatius Gear in my mind as much as it is a hat tip to what Steve Linton has done. And to have, a fourth, plus the fact that, Kevon Darton's also listed on that list with an or with Terry Lockett. You're starting to develop a defensive line rotation that I think can be beneficial to this team to have options moving forward, especially as you start to see tougher competition.
Totally. Other changes to the depth chart: Jason Simmons Jr. is now the co-number 1 at boundary safety with Jihad Carter. I don't think, at least I had seen a lot of, he hadn't stood out to me a lot, Jason Simmons, but he is now on there. So good to see him next to Jihad Carter, who we have seen plenty of in game. And then also Eric Coley is now the number 2 field safety in place of Braylon Oliver, who was not at the UConn game. He did not travel with the team. We don't know why he didn't travel with the team, but usually not a hugely good thing. So those are 2 differences that are in the secondary. And then the other difference that we have is that Wes Ho, who was listed, as well as Joe Cruz on the offensive line backups, are both gone. Anthony Redd and Mark Petrie take their places. Ho took about, 30-ish snaps at that, I was going to say football, fullback tight end spot that Elmore usually plays. So maybe they're trying that out. Him and Max Mang were kind of the guys on that. So maybe it'll be a mixture of Max Mang and Wes Ho to kind of, you can't replace Chris Elmore, but to attempt to play his role, because it is a hugely important one. And I think Syracuse practiced a ton with it in preseason, and they don't want to just drop it. So they have to figure out how they're going to use it. So Wes Ho and Max Mang will probably be your guys there, blocking for Sean Tucker.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Moneyball situation where, you're trying to replace Giambi and Damon and all of that. Not Damon, but you're trying to replace with a committee, right? You don't need one guy that's a true equivalent. You just need to be able to pick that slack up and be able to figure out another way to approach that situation. I think you hit it spot on when you talk about the amount of effort and timing they put into creating this offense.
Yeah, it's just the game plan.
Yeah, under the idea that you're going to have Elmore popping in at tight end, popping in at fullback. So to have to abandon the fullback entirely and move forward, especially early on in a brand new offense where everyone is still learning and continuing to build and piece things together, it is important that you have a way to sort of hold on to what you developed with Elmore healthy. And as you said, 30-ish snaps, sort of filling in that role. Ho sort of brings in the opportunity to continue doing that. And that's something that I think we can definitely expect against Purdue, and something that I think I'm curious to see sort of how that rotation with Mang and Ho sort of works, if they are going to rotate, even though they're 2 pretty different roles in terms of how they'd be used. Shout out to Max Mang for having a tight end catch in a true tight end role last week. I can't, escape another episode without sharing that. But I think it'll be sort of, I'm genuinely curious just sort of how the tight end role continues to adapt and continues to expand under Robert and I's new system, and just sort of see what happens with that. Because, when we got our first two deep and we looked at Oronde Gadsden at tight end, wasn't entirely sure what that role was going to be. And then Max Mang, right? You're recovering from the fact that a tight end was pretty much untouched last season. And Mang has started to come in, and you see they target him on the first drive against Louisville. He's got a catch against UConn. So that's starting to increase in terms of the attempts to pass to him, right? You don't want to develop a system where every time Max Mang's on the field, he's just going to block. So to have
Totally.
a couple of targets at least keeps the question mark surrounding what the play is going to be in terms of his role. And then when you bring Wes Ho in, it's another sort of facet that continues to add to how this tight end, and then in Ho's stance, the fullback type role is going to continue to adapt and be utilized in this new offense.
Yep. I agree. I think that was a good point about, you got to keep it fresh, and Syracuse can't really have a kind of situation where a certain guy on the field, exactly what he's going to do. And I think Anai and Beck have both done a good job of creating offense that doesn't exactly streamline that. All right. Well, that's all we have for today. Tomorrow, we will be back to talk a little bit of Purdue, see what kind of team they are, really preview Purdue for you. So stick around for that on your Wednesday episode. But for now, thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen every day. Go get more on the ACC by making Locked On ACC your second listen every day. Host Candace Cooper and the local experts of Locked On take you across the ACC in 30 minutes. Make Locked On ACC your second listen. That is Locked On ACC. Owen and I will see you tomorrow.